Hi guys, I'm very excited to be speaking to you today. My name is Audrey. I'm a contributing automotive writer for theTUNDRA. And I think we should just get right into it. So for anyone who's watching, we're here with Cynthia Jones of the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation and Marisol Rios of the Zimmerman Automobile Driving Museum. So I just wanted to get started with introductions. If you guys can start with a bit more about your professional background, what led you to the position you're in now, and just day to day, some of the stuff you're working on at your respective museums. That would be a great way to begin.
Great. I'll jump in and get us started here. So I'm Cynthia Jones. I'm Director of Museum Experiences and Engagement. My teams at the Henry Ford include the museum, as well as our partnership with Ford Motor Company to produce the Ford Rouge factory tour, a tour of the F-150 truck plant. I also lead our exhibitions team and do a number of special projects as well. So I would say that what got me here is 22 years with the organization at the Henry Ford. That started as a fun summer job and moved into just me going, okay, I actually really love this, and saying yes to opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. So it's been an interesting journey. It was not one I would have predicted coming into the workforce or coming into this part of my career.
Yeah, sometimes it is just a matter of saying yes repeatedly. Marisol?
Hi, I'm Marisol Herrera. I'm the executive director at the at the Automobile Driving Museum, now called the Zimmerman, in El Segundo, California. We have a small team of about 10 people. Originally started as just myself and my executive director, and we just exploded. The way I got here, I was actually very in love with museums. So I started working at the California Science Center while I was in high school. And from there, I started working at the Natural History Museum just because it was in the same location. When I started going to college, I got gigs at the Natural History Museum in Santa Barbara, being a naturalist, being more involved in the exhibits. And I kind of fell into this rabbit hole of museums. I fell in love with them and wanted to pursue a career in museums. I originally wanted to do something in environmental studies, so it didn't work out. And when I got back here from college, I just looked up a position on Craigslist and I found this one as a receptionist. And I just moved my way up in the ranks, and I ended up being the executive director of this museum. So I've been using all of my museum skills to really push forward and get to the place I am today.
That's great. Yeah, that leads me perfectly into what was going to be my next question, which is about the experience at an automotive museum versus other institutions. You mentioned the Natural History Museum, art museums, etc. How different is it at an automotive museum to build an experience or curate an exhibit for guests than it is at an institution like that people might view as more traditionally a museum?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure, yeah.
Being part of bigger museums like the Natural History Museum, there is more order. There is, protocols that we take when we're creating exhibits. I know there are a lot of professionals brought in so we can get the proper information for these exhibits, and we have the resources such as the funding, the creativity, all of that is kind of given with these larger museums. Our museum, on the other hand, is a lot smaller. As I said, there's only 10 people. We don't have the resources like other museums, and we go based off of old literature that we have in our library to create these exhibits. So we don't have a big budget, and we have to, create creative ways of making this museum work. The exhibits work. And it's very different here because we are a very interactive museum, which is unheard of in terms of it's unheard of with other museums. So people don't know how to react when I tell them, oh, go ahead and sit in the car, touch the car, enjoy it how it should be enjoyed. And they're just blown away because You don't get that at normal museums. So that not only is that harder, more challenging for us, but it's also an opening for us to, show the vehicles in a way that is very unique.
Marisol, I love that you said that you're scrappy. And I would say that what I heard in that is that you've taken a very entrepreneurial approach to kind of figuring out the line of business and thinking about how it all works. And I also love that you emphasized how interactive you are with your collection. I think that's something that at the Henry Ford, we're obviously a huge institution. Our automotive is a big part of our collection, but is not the entirety of our collection. And, but I would say the interactive element is something that we have, we've worked very hard to ensure also gets incorporated. So similar to kind of art museums or other museums, we do put objects on display as simply looking at the object and learning the story of the object, appreciating it as an object. But then we also lean very, very hard into the experience of something. So vehicles are something we all engage with in our daily life. And I think the more that you can allow or invite a guest into experience the vehicle, that is part of what sets both of our experiences apart, both from some of the more traditional parts of the automotive industry displays, but also apart from other types of museums. And I think in our case, I would say people, when they talk about the Henry Ford as an automotive museum, they probably tend to look at the 120 or so cars I have on display in our automobile section. I love to point to the fact that we have the Rosa Parks bus, and our invite to you is to get on board the Rosa Parks bus. And I think if the Rosa Parks bus was in the Smithsonian, you would very much not get on board. But the power of that object was the act that took place in the object, and it's around the stories that are related to that.
Yeah, I completely agree that it's much more powerful if you have the interactive element and allow people to experience an exhibition like that. And I know at the Henry Ford Museum, you guys are not just a Ford museum. You make the distinction that you're the Museum of American Innovation. What do you have on display that is really trying to drive that point home, that this is about a broader story beyond just cars?
Sure, absolutely. So in the Henry Ford, we're an independent nonprofit, and we certainly have a number of the Ford family on our board. We have a long history of interconnectedness with Ford, the motor company, as well as the family. But Henry Ford, when he started the museum and started collecting, he was immediately collecting other innovators' vehicles. He was not just collecting his own creations. So we have some incredibly early pieces from Benz. We have some incredibly early pieces from makers that aren't even in existence anymore, but also from folks like Chrysler, the Dodge brothers. So really trying to tell the story of innovation over time through our collection, but also thinking about centering the collection around the American experience, people's use or adoption of those inventions and innovations. And within our museum setting, I would say that our mobility side of the museum is about 50% of the museum. So automobiles, an incredible motorsports exhibition area, Driven to Win, that we opened this time last year. Also a flight exhibition, also trains. And then the other half of the museum is much more other items around American innovation. So whether that's our With Liberty and Justice, with the Rosa Parks bus, George Washington's camp bed, the Lincoln chair, we have presidential vehicles, but also how we lived. So things about the house, things about all sorts of arrays of kind of American innovation over the past 300 years.
Wow. Yeah, that is really the full experience. Marisol, I'm curious if at the Zimmerman, first of all, how was the collection there acquired, and if there are broader stories that you guys are looking to tell with it as well?
Oh, definitely. So the museum was created by Stanley Zimmerman and Earl Rubenstein. They were great friends since the 60s. And they, well, Stanley and Earl had a deep fascination over Packards, and they started collecting together, and they rented out a big warehouse in West Los Angeles, and started just collecting a bunch of Packards. And they decided they wanted to, you know, show their collection to guests, and they created a smaller museum complete with the 50s themed ice cream parlor like we have today in our current location. And they would take folks out on rides in their Packards on Sundays, and people were really experiencing that hands-on experience that he was trying to portray with the vehicles. And eventually his collection just grew so much that he decided to look for another building, and which is where we are today. It's in El Segundo, and he chose it because of its historical significance. This building belonged to Howard Hughes before, and he just really loved, you know, air and land transportation just colliding and becoming one. We also owned we owned one of Howard Hughes's vehicles, so he really liked to play in on how everything's just kind of connected. But our museum does focus mostly on, the Henry Ford Museum, on American innovation and how the transportation and all of these American vehicles played a big role in American history. So for example, right now, we actually have a Henry Ford exhibit going on that talks about the inception of Henry Ford and all of his Model Ts, and then going on into Edsel Ford, and then how he created Lincoln and all those things as well. So we usually acquire a lot of these vehicles by donations, or somebody who just has a really nice Edsel wants to put their car on display. That's usually we loan it in, and people get very excited to have a vehicle on display in a museum.
Yeah, sure. I mean, these collections can be acquired in a number of ways, thankfully, through the generosity of collectors.
Yeah. Sometimes sorry.
Oh no, go for it. Yeah.
No, Stanley he passed away a couple of years ago, but he, during his last couple of years, did really push on purchasing his last final vehicle. So we did get like 10 more vehicles the last year he was alive, and that was another way how he acquired a lot of the cars. He would go to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and just pick which ones he wanted and send them over to the museum.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly you guys are dealing with people who are very passionate about automobiles, particularly, you know, you said you guys are in El Segundo. Southern California is car country all the way. Ford has so many passionate fans of cars like the Deuce. How do you guys make sure that you're catering to the really hardcore car audience versus people who might be a little harder to draw in?
You know, so I would use one of the examples in our collection. So we have Mustang #1, and that is obviously for many people that is a pilgrimage vehicle, right? So ensuring that we have enough information out there so that the folks who already feel that they know the complete story or know every detail discover something more. But also interpreting an object like that, so that if you just walk up to it and go, oh, what is this? I think I recognize this. This looks like a Mustang. I think I know Mustang. That you also are attracted and invited. I would also say that with the passionate fans or the collectors, we also use moments, and I know that Marisol does this as well, where we do some very, very long-standing shows of our collection and invite in others. We have a Motor Muster weekend around Father's Day where we have 600 plus vehicles come on site for display. We also do the Old Car Festival in September. That one's been around for, I want to say, somewhere around 70 or so years. And so those are opportunities where the best of their class can be seen, where folks who are just deep into this world share information with each other. But we're trying to also unlock that passion for the next generation, right? So we partnered with Haggerty last year, and they're now the presenting sponsor of our car shows. And one of the things that they came to us with was, can we have youth judging? Can we invite kids to be judges at your car shows? And I'm like, absolutely, that's brilliant, of course. And so bringing together the folks that are super passionate about it, and maybe a kid who is kind of into cars, but maybe they care more about the color of the car than the engine of the car, and helping bridge that gap, I feel, is something that we're able to do and kind of bridge the gap between various levels of interest.
Yeah, having been to cruise-ins where there was a youth judging award, I can definitely attest that it's fascinating to see what they choose versus what the adults choose. It's often very different, but you find yourself stepping back like, hey, you have a good point. I like that one too. Do you guys ever find yourself, in a position where you're facing obstacles or pushback when it comes to stuff like that, though? Like, a lot of car museums have boards of directors who are very stuck in their ways, might not want to cater to diverse audiences, might not want to bring new types of people in. Is that something that you've ever had to grapple with?
I've dealt with a little bit of that. I am a younger person, and I try to bring the younger generation here because it is an issue. There is, the art, the passion is fading. So we try to incorporate events that are, a little bit more interesting for the younger generation. So we'll bring cars that are nostalgic to them, cars that they've seen in the 80s and 90s, and they'll laugh because they come in and they say, why is there an Astro van in here? And we're like, oh, that's the reason why the station wagon died. And then they start, like, the gears start turning, and then they find out that we have, classes for high school students, and they bring them in, and they start to learn. But going back to the board members, I have had a couple of pushbacks for a couple of events where they said, no, it's too rock and roll, or no, it's too, too wild because you're bringing a live band and you're going to have motorcycles and we're not a motorcycle museum. But I said, but it's transportation, and that's what everybody loves right now. We hosted the show and we had a huge success. And slowly but surely, I've been trying to convince them, let me take the reins and go out and try to get the younger generation in here. And they're starting to let me do that, basically.
I would say that internally, I have not faced much of that. We are, with innovation in the title of the museum, we are very both looking backwards, but also looking forward. So when you are able to key in on that, share your passion, ensure that the next generation has that passion, they've given me a little flexibility in how to do that. I would actually say that more of my, I would politely call it surprise for our guests, but also that, what is that doing here? We continue to collect up to the present day. And so we're very, very actively collecting. And our fourth quarter show last year inside the museum was about the last 10 years of our collecting in the mobility space. And it included putting out a self-driving test vehicle. And that was 1 year off of being used. And so some of the pushback I'll hear from my longer term members or from guests is, well, that's not historic. That shouldn't be on display next to this amazingly beautiful 1930s vehicle. And I think that for me, I'm able to lean into, it is really about how quickly the mobility space is changing and the ability to help people connect to that. So if you see a self-driving vehicle or you see a very present day electric vehicle, And if I'm able to then display it near something that is historic, so if I'm able to put it next to a 1913 Detroit Electric with a current day Lightning F-150 prototype, then you're able to really ask interesting questions. And so I think that there's more that helping the guest bridge their expectation of what they think it means to go to a car collection and what they're experiencing that moment.
Yeah, I love that example of the Detroit Electric and the Ford F-150 Lightning, because it is surprising how many people aren't even aware that there were electric cars back in that time period. And I know, Cynthia, in some of our conversations before this panel, you mentioned that sustainability was particularly of interest to you. So if you wanted to talk any more about those efforts at the Rouge plant.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I loved when I was reading about Marisol's background and hearing you today about having started in a natural history setting. I was very blessed that when I started part of my career journey, it was when the Rouge was being completely revitalized. And so Bill Ford had come into this vision of a plant that was 85, 90 years old and had been a place with a lot of pollution, had been a place that, we had our own steel mill, we had all of the things there on site. And Bill Ford had this very green vision about the traditional way to handle a production facility like that is frankly to walk away from it and move on to the next thing, which is not a green vision. And so he had said that based on the cultural history in that site, it was the home of the Mustang, it was the home of so many iconic vehicles, that he was not going to let his company walk away. And instead, he was going to revitalize this into an example of sustainable engineering and sustainable manufacturing. So when we opened the Rouge Tours in 2004, the vast majority of our guests were coming to see trucks made. And then we would take them and show them the world's largest living roof on top of that truck plant. And they would look at us like, well, yeah, okay, fine, why? And it was fascinating because about 8 or 10 years later, guests would say to us, okay, so what are you doing now? What's happening next? And it was fascinating how Bill's vision of what was possible with manufacturing environments had over a very short period of time actually become part of what so many guests expect you to be doing things more sustainably, to be thinking about sustainability in the site, to be thinking about your impact, and then answering from your organization's care for the community, what are you doing now? And so to kind of see that transition over time has been fascinating. I predict that we're going to see that very quickly with some of our classics in our collection, where people are going to start asking things like, well, is running that Model T, how much is that polluting? Is that the right thing to do? And for us, part of that answer is it is, because we think you really should and deserve to have the experience of the vehicle. They are living, breathing things. It is also a challenge for us, do we get more of the 1913 Detroit Electrics up and running so you can ride in an electric? But then how do I talk to you about the battery technology? So, I think there's real challenges there. I think the culture has moved in ways that are going to challenge us as an industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's moved so much just in the last 5 years. Marisol, you mentioned doing programs with kids, showing them around the museum. Is that something that comes up a lot? Like being curious about the future of the industry?
Yeah, it does come up a lot. We partnered with the Da Vinci High School here in El Segundo as well, because we've noticed that shop classes were becoming non-existent. Especially in high school classes, there's no shop class, there's no wood making class, there's no hands-on, trade classes that are going on to get these students interested. So we collaborated with Da Vinci High School, who is like a college preparedness high school, which is amazing. And we created this class where they come after school to the museum, go to our shop. We have a working shop, and they basically learn how to maintain a vehicle, vintage and a newer model. So that program became so prominent in my list of programs that a lot of students were asking me, hey, I'm kind of curious. I want to start doing this. And I would say, I'm sorry, it's closed to the Da Vinci students. And this last year, I got one of the, an old student from Da Vinci, now a staff member here at the museum. He said, hey, you know what, let's make this open to all students, and let's make it in the summer. Let's make it a camp. And we've been brainstorming it. We just barely announced it last week. And a lot of students are very interested in coming here during the summer to learn about maintaining vehicles. So that's turned into its own monster. And we're also in the works of creating a youth show. I know you mentioned, making a youth judging panel, and I thought that was such a great idea. I think it'd be really nice to have maybe some of the Da Vinci students do that. But basically the youth show is for anybody 30 years and younger who has a vintage vehicle or working, project, to just show off their car and maybe network and meet other younger folks who would want to maintain and learn together. So it has become a very good program here at the museum.
Okay, I am totally going to track back with you this summer and ask okay, so how's that going?
Yeah.
What can I learn from that hands-on experience? Can I just totally rip off your model and do the same thing? That is brilliant.
That's what my goal is. I want all museums to do something like this, just because it is, I never learned how to work on a vehicle, and because I'm a girl, it wasn't seen as a thing for ladies to do. I did ceramics. I loved it, but I would have been cool to learn how to work on a car.
Yeah, and I think it gets to the workforce need that we're all going to have.
Yes.
I'm sure you have the same need. I need people who can repair and restore these working vehicles.
Yes.
And that skill set is quickly going away. And so how do you meet people and kind of fulfill our own need? That's awesome.
Yeah, it is kind of this intersection of you have the practical need, and then there's also just the added benefit of being able to bring all these people in. But I think one of the things that I hear often with programs like auto shop, car shows, etc., is that the audience is self-selecting in a way. Like if you're trying to bring in women, for example, what do you do if no women sign up for the class, or if no women have a car that they want to bring? Is that a challenge for you guys in terms of bringing in a female audience, a diverse audience to your programming?
When I first started, it was a challenge. I started here in 2016. My old executive director, she noticed it from the get-go that there weren't very many women coming to the shows or to my classes or the programs or panel discussions. So we decided to switch gears and invite an all-female panel to the museum. So we had Shirley Muldowney, Lynn St. James, Jessie Combs, and other gals from the Southern California region. And we had a panel discussion with them. And most guys, it was mostly men that showed up, which was funny. But afterwards, we got a lot of women coming out of the woodwork and saying, I saw what you did. I was too shy to go because I didn't want to feel, uncomfortable, or because it's like a male-dominated industry. And so that got us our gears working, and we decided to make an all-female ladies class, a car care class. It's called Ladies Car Care. I have 101 to 401, and it's hosted by a female teacher, and she'll take everything step by step and show you how to maintain a vehicle. And she'll show you on an older vehicle and a newer vehicle. So we've come to realize that women tend to to come to these events when it's led by women, because there's a sense of comfort knowing, we're from the same background, we have the same experiences. It's not it's not a female dominated industry, and we are definitely trying to change that with all those classes.
I would echo that approach, like that you put women to the forefront, which invites other women. And I've always found that very interesting. I've found a real dichotomy. So with the tours of the F-150 truck plant, some of the earliest work we did thinking about setting up that tour was ask the question, who drives the purchasing decision of an F-150? Who's your target market? Who drives the purchase? And tell me about your gender metrics on that. And it's very interesting that women almost always drive the purchasing power of their household. And so if you're going to go invest $70,000 in a top-end amazing vehicle, mom better want that vehicle. And so thinking about that power that exists within the industry, and then also thinking, especially when I was really starting up the tours 20 years ago, female faces were not at the top of the engineering. They weren't super visible in the making of the vehicle, the designing of the vehicle. They were there, but you had to look. And so I purposely looked and said, who are we featuring? Today, that's much, much, much easier, right? But it was not so easy 20 years ago. But it was very purposeful on our part to make sure those faces were visible and also take it back in time, as we always do, right? So we said, Rosie the Riveters, the arsenal of democracy, right? Like this has real power and resonance. Let's tell those stories and then let's carry that story forward into today. We've had some amazing programs where the actual Rosies, who are aging quite quickly now, come in, and they have been absolute rock stars when we're able to feature them. And you watch little girls walk up to them and say, were you Rosie? Were you like on the poster? Will you sign my autograph? Will you? And just having multiple generations of women recognize the power of women has been something that we've really worked hard at. We've also done a lot of programs with the Girl Scouts, and really thinking about scouting and how scouts bring that audience in, and what that can look like and do.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think you just answered my next question, Cynthia, which is, kind of finding ways to combat this logical fallacy that so many people have of, we can't feature female stories in the automotive industry because they're just not there. We would love to if there were only more of them, but it is just a matter of laying everything out from past to present and saying, no, there really is a through line here that we can follow.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true with women's stories. The same can be said, I think, since George Floyd and a lot of the racial reckoning that this country has been doing is also telling the stories that were untold in that area. And I think it is truly just, I don't accept we can't tell that story, it's not there. That means you haven't looked hard enough. That means you haven't asked the right person. So let me turn to my network of people that I can ask who might put me in touch with the person that you can ask who might put me in touch, right? So digging until you find, and then shining the light there. And I think, whether it's Lynn St. James or whether it's, right now I'm working with Beth Peretta, like thinking about women who've been trailblazers. Almost every woman I've ever worked with who's been at the top of the game in this area, if you ask them, who else should I know? They will automatically and generously connect you to that person. And it is an amazing network. And I think once you can tap into the power of the network, then all those stories surface. and you can really tell a rich history.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously, as women in what is traditionally seen as a male-dominated field, you guys have a unique perspective on that. Have there been times when it felt challenging, when it felt like you were not being taken seriously, and how did you deal with that? Or, it could be that it's not been an issue the entire time, but I am curious to hear.
It's odd because I feel like, I have an all male board. I have most of my docents are males. I probably have 3 females, and then my staff is mostly female because no, it's just I have mostly female staff. And in the beginning, it did feel like whenever I came up with suggestions or a program, it was not taken seriously. But it could have also been because I was younger and didn't have the experience. This was my first director position, but I had the fire. I wanted to have these events. I wanted women to feel more included. I started off by creating smaller programs and inviting a smaller group of women to the museum and seeing how they would react to that. I was mostly doing ask for forgiveness instead of permission with those programs. But I'm happy I did them because at this point it's turned into, people know the museum for being a very inclusive location. They know about my ladies card care. They know about my female restoration program and my show, the Women in Wheels show that I host once a year. And I mean, it did feel like I wasn't being taken seriously. And now these last 2 years, people are really noticing the impact that I'm making in the automotive industry.
Yeah, I can certainly reflect and say yes to all of those things that you just said, whether it's age. I'm at an interesting career phase now where I have a director title, where I've been in the industry a while. There's certainly power that comes with that. I think when I was fresh in and I was much younger and definitely had the fire and the passion, I also did a lot of that, do it and ask for forgiveness if it fails, but also use it when it succeeds as the example of here's what happens when we push. I will say that I think I found it more in the early years. I think the last few years has shifted a lot. But I do wonder about that. Like, is that just on the surface? Is it just performative that you're making sure that your conference isn't all males on your panels, or is this deeper change? So I do wonder about that. And how we will hold people to that over time to make sure that it is a true culture shift, that it is a true making a bigger stage and inviting more people, that it truly is inclusion and moving into equity, right? Like, so I do worry about that. I will also say that I have very purposefully made sure that at times when I was the only female voice at the table, I had to take a lot of behind the scenes work to make allies with all the men at the table. And then when other women started to be at the table, make allies with them and really apply some of the things, right? So there's a lot of science around when it's a meeting, it's a mixed gender meeting. Men will think that women have dominated the conversation if they speak 30% of the time. And that oftentimes you won't hear a woman's idea until a man says the exact same idea. And so once more women started being at the table, one of the things that I would sit down over coffee and say is, so here's some of the science of that. I'm sure you've experienced it, I've experienced it. So I will do this for you. Every single time you make a great point at a meeting, I'm going to reinforce that you made that great point. let's just make that a working agreement between us, that that's what we're going to do. And it was really interesting to watch the shift when you're doing some very smart tactical things like that to help other women's voices get heard, and they're helping you get heard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would echo so many of the things that you said there. I definitely agree that there is this tension, right, between wondering if you're at the table because you were 100% put there by people who believe in you, or because it's just a performative thing. And given that that can be such an uphill battle, making sure that it's not, one of the big overarching questions that I wanted to ask you both is, what motivates you? You know, have there been moments with a particular exhibition or a particular program where you really connected with someone or really felt like you were making a difference, bringing in more women or whoever your target audience might be?
I would say it was my Women in Wheels show. I just had it this past weekend. I always get so nervous with it because, you know, I feel like I'm in the limelight and everybody's looking at me because it's by women for women. And we, you know, this last show we had over 150 vehicles. We had over 1,000 spectators. I try to make it all female led, so female band, female DJ, female panel, female judges, and female vintage vendors. So that one is one of my favorite shows. It motivates me so to no end. Like, I was working probably 12-hour shifts every day getting this show ready, towards the end of it. And it's one of my favorite shows because I get to meet so many women in the area that I had never met before, and all of them have amazing, beautiful cars or have the individual stories of why they chose to, you know, to drive this vehicle or to, you know, or to restore this vehicle. It usually it usually has a lot to do with emotion, which I'm all here for because I get very emotionally attached to a lot of things as well. So it's very nice hearing other women say, you know, this was my grandfather's Impala, I restored it and now I'm driving it in his memory. Or, you know, I had my first kiss here, or I had, you know, things like that. But it does get very, you know, I do have my harder days, especially during COVID, you know, since we are in a smaller museum. We didn't get a lot of funding. We don't get a lot of funding, and we were on the brink of closing down. And that was my closest, like, lowest point of being so unmotivated and so sad. And I really, you know, I really stuck to my guns, and I wanted the museum to keep going and to keep Stanley's legacy alive. So, you know, I worked extra hours just to make sure I get those grants in, and all of that hard work, you know, worked very well because now I'm still having my favorite show, and it was a huge success. So, yeah, never give up.
Yeah, so it was very interesting as you were telling the stories. I was like, oh, that,
Yeah.
that, that.
Yeah.
And I think it was, I reflect back to 2008 in Detroit, then across the country. We were facing a very serious recession. And late in 2008 and then going into 2009, I was directly running the factory tour experience, the F-150 tours, and the truck plant shut down. You know, Ford couldn't afford to be producing trucks for a number of months, and they shut down. And Ford came to us and said, so you're going to shut down, right? And I said, no, 100% I'm not shutting down. They looked at me like I was insane. And I said, here's why. Just as Bill Ford and every leader of the car companies are going to go testify in front of Congress about why the auto industry matters to our country and why it deserves funding and a bailout and help, I need to tell that story to every single guest who's coming to Detroit this summer. And I need to be able to stand for the power of this culture in this region. And it was very interesting because over that summer, I took tours of people, especially a tremendous amount of people from Congress, into a pretty dark, not moving factory with trucks just stopped on the line from the day that the workforce had been sent home. And the emotional power of seeing a 1,000,000 square foot building that normally would have 1,000 people working on that floor stopped. And then me saying, oh, and I would love to send you to this local restaurant for lunch, but I can't because they had to shut down because the workforce can't afford to buy their food there right now. And I would love to send you here, but I can't because it's shut down. The emotional engagement around the reality of that experience and the impact that it had, that kept me going through the hardest days. I mean, I literally had a box under my desk ready to be laid off and sent home while giving these tours. And so when COVID came across, it was very similar, right? Like, okay, what we do matters because what we do impacts lots of people. And it is also almost a sacred responsibility to tell the stories through objects, but tell the stories of people's lives and the way that we have lived with these objects, the impact it has on our culture, and then the impact that it can have very future thinking, right? So my positive is every single time I go in the museum and there's a school kid in there, and the school kid, when she says, wow, that's a cool car, I wonder who designed that, or that's a really interesting system, how did you make that? I go, okay, that's the next generation. So that's the bright side, but I think it's also because the emotional connectivity and the deep, that it matters.
Yeah. I mean, I so appreciate you guys sharing those stories of the pandemic and the recession in 2008. I think that's a really interesting connection to make, and you do ultimately have to keep it going for the next generation. So I really applaud both of you for doing that. As we start to wrap up here, considering all of the stories that you've shared so far, I want to look ahead to what's next for both of you and give you both the opportunity to plug anything and everything that your museums have coming up that our viewers might be interested in checking out.
So I have a calendar of car shows that I do. Every year I have about 12 to 15 car shows. And they all have a different theme. So my next show that's coming up is a Volkswagen show, air-cooled Volkswagens. So if you have one or want to come spectate, we have that. But just follow our website. We have an event page that is filled with activities to do. And if you are a high school student, a female, or just anybody interested in coming and learning about vehicles and how to maintain them, we're currently going to be opening our classes within this week to register to those classes if you are interested in learning more. And other than that, we're having a summer concert series to help with fundraising at the museum. And we're looking at acquiring more vehicles and getting bigger than better than ever.
That's awesome. So I would say that we are back. We've been back open since we closed for about 4 months and then figured out how we were going to reopen in this pandemic, and we are 100% back. Not cars, but thinking about mobility in the broadest sense. I opened an Apollo exhibition this past month, and the numbers in the museum, it's amazing. People are hungry to get out, they're hungry to engage, they're hungry to be in spaces again and really active. So there's a lot going on for us. I think this year we're certainly in our car shows, we're celebrating 100 years of Lincoln. So really going to be featuring some amazingly gorgeous vehicles, but also just really thinking about the opportunity for families to be out and about and engaging with each other. So there's always something going on. And I think the thing that I would push is actually the thing we probably don't want to be thinking about, which is the virtual experience, right? So we're having this conversation virtually, which I absolutely love because we're, spread out couple thousand miles apart from each other and able to really connect. We are continuing to strongly invest in that content. We launched something called InHub over the course of the pandemic shutdown, which really brings together just an amazing suite of opportunities for people to learn through all of our virtual resources. And we're continuing to build out those, working on virtual field trips, working on all sorts of ways so that our museum, while situated right in the heart of the Detroit region, can reach people across the country. And that is, I think, the thing that's very exciting for me, is to play with bringing people back on site and still serving in a virtual capacity.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's amazing how the pandemic shut everyone down and then opened us up to all these new opportunities. Well, that is, I think, everything I wanted to ask you guys. This has been a fascinating conversation for me. I'm so glad that we got the chance, like you said, across multiple time zones, across the country.
No, that was awesome. And I would echo, thank you. It was really wonderful to be invited to join you all. And Marisol, I'm not kidding. I am totally gonna connect with you.
Yes.
I mentioned you in this panel to our automotive curator, Matt Anderson, and he immediately looked up whether you had gone to some of the historic car collections meetings that he'd been at. And he said, I don't see her. And I said, well, she's in our network now.
I'm just very happy that, we're doing these things again. I felt like it was this wave of silence for 2 years, and it's so nice seeing meeting all of these new executive directors as well. Not you're new, but that there's, at the LeMay Museum, we have a female director there. There's another female director I just met a couple weeks ago. Oh, Lana from the Lions Museum just around the corner here. I met Cynthia, and it's just really nice finding other female directors, just because I felt for a while that I was alone in this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Seriously.